Thank you for tuning into this week's episode of the Rising Laterally podcast. This is Arjun Sachdev.
And this is Jay Ballou. We hope you find something here that offers you new meaning or a fresh perspective.
If you do, we encourage you to give it life.
Be bold.
Experiment.
And most importantly, bring it into the interactions with the people you surround yourself with.
And see what happens.
We each spend about a third of our lives sleeping, and a significant portion of that time dreaming. Why? It is our pleasure to have Dr. Antonio Zadra here to help us answer that question today. Tony has built an impressive career in the incredibly fascinating field of sleep science. He holds an MA in experimental psychology and a PhD in clinical psychology, both from McGill University, and he completed a postdoctoral fellowship in the Dream and Nightmare Laboratory in Montreal. He's currently full professor in the Department of Psychology at the University of Montreal and is a researcher at the Center for Advanced Research in Sleep Medicine. Tony has published over 100 research articles and book chapters on dreams and parasomnias. He's been a highly sought-after speaker all over the globe, and he is the co-author of the 2020 release, When Brains Dream, Exploring the Science and Mystery of Sleep, which will be the focus of today's episode. Tony, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
It's great to have you. You describe yourself as a one-ironaut. It's not a word that we use every day. It was a new one to me when I encountered it. It means someone who explores dream worlds, usually associated with lucid dreaming. Before we get into the fantastic research you've done exploring other people's dreams, I'm curious, when did your fascination with your own dreams start?
I would say that probably like many people, I had sort of a passing ephemeral fascination with a few of my dreams when I was, in my very early teens. So I'd had these really cool flying dreams, for instance, and those are the ones that really captured my attention. But it was really when I was in college that I had this particularly long, vivid dream, which ended up being a lucid dream. I didn't know that term existed at the time. I only found out about that afterwards. That my interest, I would say, not only peaked, but it's actually literally because of this dream that I finally decided to become a sleep and dream researcher. So it really, in many ways, was a life-altering dream. But it raised so many questions in my mind after I had that dream that I was just really compelled to try to find out more about this. And then when I discovered that people actually did research on dreams and serious work, I thought that's something I wanted to pursue.
That's awesome. Was that dream something, I'm curious, that you shared with your friends or family the day after you had it, or did you kind of sit and digest it for a while?
Oh, no, I digested it for quite a while. It's the first dream that I ever wrote down. I was 17 years old at the time. And like I said, it just so happened that a little bit after I had this dream, in which I had all kinds of sensations. I got stabbed. I was in pain. I felt the warmth of my blood. I escaped this prison. There were some characters from my high school that were there. It's really long, convoluted. But at one point, I became aware that I was dreaming, that it's the only thing that made sense anyways. But I was really, I thought it was mind-boggling that I was having these exceedingly vivid, multi-sensorial experiences while my real physical body was, I knew, asleep in my bed. And even at one point, I just yelled, and I'm going, here I am yelling, and people are sort of turning around in my dream going, what's this imbecile doing? And I'm thinking, I'm in my bed, all quiet now. So anyways, this got me thinking. And then, like I said, a few weeks afterwards, I just happened in a secondhand bookstore to come across this more of a popular but pop psych book on dreams called Creative Dreaming. And it's while going through that book that I saw this chapter on what was called lucid dreaming. And I went, oh, what I had a name. And then there was a bibliography, and I just started reading more and more about it and basically got hooked.
That's awesome.
And got hooked to explore my own dreams and, of course, those of others.
Well, there have been a number of books written about dream science and sleep science, many of which the average person probably doesn't know about because they're kind of left behind in the 19th century. You write in the book about how a lot of people, myself included, see Freud as sort of the first pioneer to break ground in the field of dream science. His book, The Interpretation of Dreams, published in 1899, eventually garnered a lot of attention, and it's one that people continue to return to. But there was a lot of science that was put forward much earlier in the 19th century. So I'm curious, Tony, when you think about the kind of true origin of the field of dream science, where do you place it?
Well, if we think really of dream science and even our clinical understanding of dreams, there are, as you mentioned, a whole bunch of people who were doing very fascinating avant-garde work on dreams, brain processes in dreams, clinical work of dreams, much before Freud. But unfortunately, for a variety of historical reasons, whose names were forgotten. So we had people like Alfred Murray, who wrote this fascinating book, Sleep and Dreams, back in 1861, or Hervé Saint-Denis, another Frenchman who wrote Dreams and How to Guide Them in 1867, which incidentally is my all-time favorite book on dreams, because it's amazing. So many of his ideas now find resonance with modern neuroscientific findings and theorizing about dreams, including lucid dreams, over a century later. But for instance, these two individuals showed how it was possible to use external stimuli to influence dreams. So, Hervé Saint-Denis, for instance, anytime he traveled, he'd associate particular perfumes with those locations. So he would smell the perfume every time he was in a place X. Then when he returned to his home, he'd have a servant, unbeknownst to him, on one night to pick one of these perfumes and administer to him, put a few drops on his pillow, for instance. And he wanted to see, would he dream of the areas that were associated with the perfume? And so these ideas of sensory conditioning, and the answer was yes. Mm-hmm. And also, what would happen if you combine perfumes with your memories, start combining areas that you've associated with each perfume and sort of fuse them together in your dream? Alfred Murray was also, for instance, interested in how external sensations get incorporated into your dream, and also wrote about how different brain areas were responsible for generating dream images and various forms of perceptions. So you had these researchers, you had others like Mary Calkins, a pioneering female psychologist, who was the first to really try to use statistics to quantify dimensions of dreams. And so in one of her first studies published in 1893 called Statistics of Dreams, she tried to quantify over 400 dream reports, and she already was able to document, for example, to make a hierarchy of sensory representations of dreams. So how often do they contain olfactory stimuli or, sounds? And a categorization that still holds true today. She also was able to note that dreams were more vivid and emotionally intense later in the morning than earlier in the sleep period, which corresponds to what we know now about sleep, REM sleep, and its differential association with dreams and dream recall and dream vividness. And then an Italian researcher, Santi De Sanctis, who was very interested in not only the clinical use of dreams, so he studied the dreams of children, of the elderly, of the mentally ill. He proposed these fascinating models of how dreams were reflections of people's waking emotions. But he also was one of the first people to use new emerging electrophysiological recordings to try to document what is going on in sleep. When are people dreaming? How do they relate to respiration rates? And in many ways, using these very crude instruments, over 120 years ago, was able to already to show patterns of dream recall and content that really mirrors what we discovered after formally finding out about REM sleep in the 1950s and having modern EEG apparatus and so on to highlight these relations between what goes on in heart rate and brain activity. He also was a proponent that we should study sleep in animals if we want to understand the functions of sleep in humans. He had also this evolutionary perspective. So in many regards, many of these approaches and ways of trying to find out why we dream, why we sleep, what functions they have, are much more aligned with many contemporary models of dreams and sleep than typical Freudian ideas. So yes, there was a lot of really fascinating work that was being done at the time that unfortunately got forgotten in history.
Yeah, and actually that was one of my favorite parts about reading your book was learning about the history, and two figures that I wanted to double click into that you just mentioned. One was Mary Calkins. Just to, add a little bit more to that, she ended up establishing one of the first psychological labs in the United States. She became the first woman president of the American Psychological Association. And it's just interesting because we recently had a conversation where we talked about patriarchal and matriarchal structures in society. So when I read about her story and what she did and the fact that she's an absolute icon, I thought it was important to highlight that. And then another scientist you mentioned was Maury, and then tying that to the lucid dream that you had. When I learned about what he was doing in terms of the talent that he had as a lucid dreamer, where he was capable of being aware that he was in the middle of a dream, like you had described, to me, that was another sign of human capability and achievement. I mean, the ability to become proficient at being a lucid dreamer and learn, the various ways of your awareness. I mean, to me, that was fascinating. So I appreciate you bringing that to light in the book.
Well, it's always been a fascination to me. And of course, that has this whole what we call lucid dreaming or conscious awareness while we are still immersed in a dream has a long tradition in various religions or in Tibetan Buddhism, for instance. But in the Western culture and from more of a scientific or empirical perspective, yeah, these were really innovative people and who not only tried to cultivate these abilities, but then tried to see in what way they could be manipulated and what was possible and not possible, and then trying to explain in terms of what at the time was known about, how the brain worked and what areas in the brain, and what is the difference between perceiving things and imagining things. So big, even philosophical questions that are still not resolved today in certain respects, but that these people were still trying to get a grasp on, over 120 years ago.
Absolutely. Yeah, and we would certainly love to talk about the experiential quality of dreams a lot more going forward here. Before we do, maybe we can talk a little bit about the physiology of sleep. As you write in the book, from an evolutionary standpoint, sleep is a very costly behavior. We're losing awareness of our external environment for hours at a time. Obviously earlier in our history as humans, that would have put us at great threat to predators around us. So it stands to reason that there are tremendous benefits here that offset those costs. So can you tell us a little bit about why sleep is necessary, or at least why we think it's necessary from an evolutionary standpoint?
Sure. That's a great question and a fairly complex one, and one to which we, in many respects, didn't really have an answer for till recently. And some people would say we still don't really have a satisfying answer for today. That said, we know that sleep accomplishes many key functions. So it helps regulate insulin. So if you're sleep deprived, even if you sleep just like 4 or 5 hours a night, 4 or 5 days in a row, and we look at your blood sugar levels, you already start showing signs of being pre-diabetic. So it plays a role in that. Right now there's with the pandemic, all these discussions about vaccines. And, I hear people saying, oh, this one has 95% efficacy and this one is only 87. Yeah. But one thing that astounds me is that there's been, at least here in Canada, but elsewhere, there's been very little discussion about the importance of the sleep you get before any vaccination and afterwards. And so if you're sleep deprived, these are actually studies done on this, but with other vaccines, not for COVID, for hepatitis and others, but you can have up to 50% less antibodies in response to a vaccine that you have if you are even partially sleep deprived before you get vaccinated or after. And this is true even a month after you've been vaccinated. So here we are debating about, 8-9 percentage points more or less, but you don't sleep well before you get a vaccine or afterwards, that could be cut in half. And, there's no discussion. So your immune system and sleep are closely tied together. We know that growth hormones, tissue repair. So there's a lot going on. There's also, increasing evidence that, while we are awake, we accumulate, if you want, toxins, garbage in our brains that needs to be cleared out. And so it's only fairly recently that scientists have discovered there's this lymphatic or a system that sort of goes into the brain and then removes these toxins, including tau proteins, which are important biomarker or contributor to various neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's disease. And so there's, sleep does a whole bunch of things. So far from it, it's not a homogeneous state. There's lots of different things going on, but also in terms of functions. But probably most remarkably is that many of these things could probably take place while we are awake. It's just we believe more convenient to do so in sleep. And that sleep probably at the base evolved for some other primordial reason. When we say it's convenient, it's sort of like if you do, when office buildings are cleaned or, some kind of shopping center, they're cleaned in the evening. Why? Well, there's few people around, right? It's easier to do.
Right.
But there's nothing that prevents you from cleaning offices and so on in the daytime either. And so the question really becomes, why do you have to be shut down? In sleep, it's not just that you're relaxing, and these things are going on. You're actively cut off from the external environment. So why would you have to sort of go offline? And one reason we now know that your brain has to go offline is that your brain needs time to make sense of what it has recently experienced, things you have learned, emotions, social aspects, all kinds of things that we learn. And that is this period of, for every, 3 hours you're awake, your brain needs an hour offline, at least the human brain does, to sort of process and make sense of this information. And we think that consolidating these memories and how we integrate them in things we already know is one of the key things that sleep does in terms of also regulating our emotions, and that maybe the function of dreams ties into this thing. So sleep is very important. We know that's important for many things, but probably across all species that have sleep, there's a driving fundamental reason why they need to go offline and not just be in a resting state where you quickly can react to some external danger.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And logically now, it makes sense when you say that, of why maybe people need 8 hours of sleep, because if they're awake for 16 and your brain needs 2 or 3 hours to process everything it's taken in, well, the math works out where you need roughly 8 hours of sleep. And then the other thing around, logically based off of what you just said, is you think about somebody who's growing, a teenager or a child. As you say in the book, it's a lot easier for the body to grow when you're not trying to grow while playing or learning at school or, with the family. So I thought that was interesting too, where it's like, yeah, your body found the right time and the right mix to actually get that done, your growth spurt done. And that's at night. That's why, usually when somebody's going through a growth spurt, it's like, wow, I grew overnight.
And at times that's literally true. You can grow, quarter of an inch at key moments of your lifetime at nighttime, particularly during slow wave sleep, where these growth hormones are usually released. So so sleep does really many things, and probably the range of functions it accomplishes and to what extent probably varies from one species to another. But what every species has to do is learn from their experiences, learn from their environment, and to make sense, whatever that may mean for the organism. But it's to adapt to your environment, to predict, what does this world hold for me and how can I survive in it? And the brain, all brains probably need time off to try to make sense of all this.
And you mentioned earlier that sleep is not a homogeneous process. You talk in the book at length about the differences between REM sleep and non-REM sleep, and they have significant impact on the characteristics of dreams that will be had in those respective states. Could you talk a little bit about the difference between REM and non-REM?
Sure. So, sleep, at least in human sleep, occurs in cycles, and each cycle lasts about 90 minutes. And so, when you fall asleep, it's like taking an elevator and you're in that transition phase. And then your elevator moves further down, and you enter what's a sleep stage called N2, where we spend about 0.5% of the night, by the way, which is an intermediate phase of sleep. And then into what is known as slow wave sleep or deep sleep. And then you'll start coming back up again. You'll pass by N2, and then you'll have your first period of REM sleep. Now, each of these stages of sleep have their own EEG signatures, their own neurochemical signatures as well, or balances. Um, REM sleep is particular for at least three reasons. If you look at the brain activity, EEG, of someone who is in REM sleep, it pretty much looks like someone who is awake. So your brain looks as if it was actively doing stuff.
Mm.
At the same time, you're actively paralyzed. There's this mechanism, motor atonia, that prevents you from acting out the content of your dreams. And so you have your brain that's super active. You have your major muscle groups, limbs, and so on that are actively paralyzed. And then you have, under closed eyelids, these eye movements where REM comes from, rapid eye movement sleep. So you can see the eyes darting back and forth under the closed eyelids. Your respiration rate can be irregular, your heartbeat can be irregular, whereas these characteristics are absent, like from slow wave sleep. And as the night progresses, your periods of REM sleep become longer and longer. Now, we have good evidence that you dream pretty much under some form or another across all these different stages of sleep. You might not remember them and they might be different. So some people will be able to report these images playing in front of their eyes, so to speak, or in their imagination as they fall asleep, things known as hypnagogic imagery, which has been put to good use by various artists and writers and so on, often linked to creativity. They tend to be a bit less immersive. Um, the kinds of dreams or sleep meditation we tend to have in N2 tends to be a bit more thought-like, not really emotional, not as narratively structured or driven or bizarre. And then in REM sleep is where really the most unusual hyper-associative dreams take place. And as the periods of REM sleep evolve across the night, they last longer and longer. And the dreams we experience within them also seem to be more intense in terms of visual intensity, but it can be other sensory modalities, in terms of bizarreness, in terms of the emotional content. Um, and so REM sleep is a stage in which when people think of dreams are really more bizarre, salient dreams, that tends to be the stage in which they occur. Similarly, we were talking earlier about lucid dreams, dreams in which you become aware that you're dreaming, or nightmares, really intense negative content driven dreams. They tend to also occur out of REM sleep, and preferentially in those longer periods of REM sleep that you have later in the sleep period, earlier to when you wake up in the morning. So your first REM cycle can last just a few minutes even, but your last one could last 30, 40 minutes.
What exactly is happening scientifically in the REM sleep that's allowing the brain to wander a little bit more and kind of give you that more feeling of, hey, I'm experiencing something that probably wouldn't happen in real life?
Right. So in REM sleep, there's a lot of fascinating things going on. So for instance, your levels of norepinephrine are virtually shut down. And this is, among other things, prevents you from accessing what's known as episodic memories, memories for events that you've experienced as you experience them. So in dreams, you might incorporate things that you recently saw or did, but often in an unusual context. Your brain also becomes hyper-associative, so you can take one thing and then it quickly merges and morphs and associates to a whole bunch of other things, either at a semantic level or at other levels in your brain. You also have a degree of serotonin, another neurotransmitter that is altered, which probably contributes to our feeling that what we experience in the dream is important, and also might explain why many people, when they wake up and remember a dream, want to share it as if, look, this was really
Yeah.
cool, this was important. Whereas if you had that kind of stories or imaginations going through your mind while daydreaming, you people rarely lapse out of daydreaming going, I got to tell you this reverie I was just having. But dreams,
Right.
it's different. And we think that's partially driven by these altered levels of serotonin. You also have areas of your brain like the prefrontal cortex, which are by and large deactivated. And these areas, among other things, help us execute things like judgment, planning, things that are usually not functional in our dreams. And so, you're dreaming that you're at work and then someone walks in and says, I'm your twin brother. And you go, wow, I didn't know I had a twin brother. This is so cool, right? Like everything you just accept, right? And it's only when you wake up that you realize how bizarre it is. And so dreams are fascinating for many reasons, but one of them is that while you are in it, you believe it is a real experience. That's why you run away from that figure that's chasing you, or why you feel madly in love with this person who's flirting with you, or why you get upset at a boss or a boss with you, because it's not just how you react to the dream, but it's populated by all these other dream characters or animals that interact with you, and they react to what you do as well. So it's a really complex and fascinating dynamic. But I was mentioning, a little bit about some neurotransmitters that are altered and brain areas activated, and there's others in the limbic system for emotions that can be activated.
Right.
But these are still fairly, I would say, broad strokes of what's going on in the brain and how it relates to some broad features of dreams. But we're still quite a ways away of really being able to pinpoint it in a much more refined way. But that's also true of wakefulness. And so we don't really figure out, what are the neural correlates of different forms of thoughts and consciousness and wakefulness. We're going to be even further away for doing it for something that occurs within sleep, I think.
The section on REM in your book, you mentioned the connection to that serotonin turning off is very similar to what happens when folks experiment with LSD, which
Absolutely.
creates that trippy, wandering feeling of, hey, there's an unusual connection. So that connection to REM sleep, to LSD, I thought was fascinating as well.
Yeah, LSD, psilocybin, magic mushrooms, in other words, the active ingredient. Yes, and all of these have, these, trippy feel to them. But the other thing that these substances induce is a feeling that what you're experiencing is imbued with meaning, like these profound revelations. And at the time, they really do feel that way. Now, of course, there's many examples of people who, wrote down their profound revelations during these various altered states. But then, when they come out of it or the next day and they read what they wrote down, it's trivial, it's banal, but they'll say, but there's a lot more to it than that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
You had to be there.
You had to be there, and I was, but I'm no longer there. So we think that there's definitely parallels, and that drives us to really believe that there's something important going on in our dreams. And maybe that plays also an important role in the function of dreams, because you tend to take them not seriously, but you react to them viscerally and emotionally, and it's another state of experience. So yes, there's these fascinating parallels between the state in dreams when you're in REM sleep and many other forms of altered states of consciousness during wakefulness.
Yeah, and one of the things I really took away from your book on that topic was that even though dreams may be bizarre, they're not random. Like the narrative may wander quite a bit, but everything connects, even if they're weak associations that thread through the whole story. It's not just like scene A and then a completely unrelated scene B. There's some kind of glue, however strange it may be, that connects those two scenes. And that, I think, ties into the theory that you and your co-author put forward, NEXTUP. Could you unpack that acronym for us and
Right.
tell us what the theory entails?
So it's network exploration to understand possibilities. So in essence, it tries to explain various features of dreams. Why are they bizarre? Why are they hyper-associative? Why do they have these narrative structures, but with these elements of bizarreness in it? Why do the content of dreams vary as a function of REM sleep, N2 sleep, slow wave sleep, hypnagogic images? Why is it that dreams preferentially will incorporate events from the day that were salient or emotionally salient to us? So there's a lot of things that we know about dreams, and unfortunately, there's a lot of models about dreams out there that really try to account for a small, in our opinion, a small slice of dreams. So only why they are bizarre or why they're hard to remember. Or dreams are to simulate social interactions, or dreams are there to regulate emotions. And to us, that's a bit like people arguing over, what's the function of the tongue? And you have someone who says, well, the tongue is there to speak. And someone says, no, it's there to taste, and they're arguing about this. And from the outside, you go, that's insane, right?
Yeah.
And we think that in dreams, unfortunately, there's been this way too much focus on these small slivers. And we think dreams are perfectly capable and probably of executing many of the above, and maybe differently in different sleep stages. And so, in essence, this model tries to explain these different features of dreams and their underlying neurobiology. And we believe that the dreaming brain places you in these virtual environments, see how you react to them, and it's incorporating these emotionally or otherwise salient experiences, concerns that we have in very loose ways. So there's, as you mentioned, these loose associations, but that you can see where they began and ended. And we give the example of, these cocktail party discussions, where 4 or 5 people are talking, and after 5 minutes, someone goes, "Oh, how did we get to talk about this?" Right? Because we started with this. But if you were tape recording, you could see how those steps were made.
Right.
And we think dreams function in a similar way. They're hyper associative, and we know that. And there's some fascinating examples of how the brain can do this. But we think that ultimately, again, the things we have learned about ourselves, about others, how the world works, and things we are exposed to every day, your brain needs to integrate that into what we've learned in the past. So it's not just consolidating memory, which is sort of learning facts, right?
Right.
It's how do you use this material, right? How do you integrate what you've had before? And so we like to say also that, non-REM sleep, where a lot of this consolidation might take place, might make you smart because you're consolidating these facts that you've learned. But REM sleep takes this and tries to figure out, where does this fit in to what I've experienced in the past? How can I make sense of this? What is not important? What is important? How can I build that so I better understand tomorrow and in the future what awaits me? What is the world outside, and how can I adapt to it? And so REM sleep isn't about making you smart. It's about making you wise. It's using those facts. And so this ties into what we think NEXTUP, or the dreaming brain, is doing across different stages of sleep. And we also think that the dreaming brain, whether it's our model or any other model of dream function, whatever the function of dreams is, it gets executed when you are dreaming, live, right there. Whether or not you remember the dream is really secondary. Now, you can remember dreams and do a lot with them. There's a lot of artists use dreams for inspiration, and there's discoveries and creativity. But that's sort of like a bonus. That's like, your heart makes a sound every time it beats. But the sound it makes didn't involve so that cardiologist or your doctor would invent a stethoscope and listen to it. So we can use a heartbeat to infer things about cardiovascular health, but that's not the function of the heartbeat. The heartbeat is to pump blood, right? And so dreams execute their function But then the parts we do recall, if we're so inclined, we can use for different things. But that's not their inherent function. And the reason we think that, among other things, that most of us never remember our dreams or remember them very infrequently. And some people go through their entire lives rarely remember their dreams. And if you think, even if dreams only occur in REM sleep, think that you have about at least an hour and a half of REM sleep every night. And over a lifetime, about 6 years worth. So
Wow.
you spent 6 years of your life immersed in that really complex state, and that has no function
Yeah, right.
because you
Highly
don't
unlikely.
remember
Yeah.
what went on.
Yeah.
Or think you wake up this morning, and you don't remember anything, and then you're in the shower. Later on in the day, you're taking a bus going to somewhere, and then you suddenly remember a dream from last night. Go, oh yeah, I had this. So now the dream, like 6 hours later, acquires a function because you remember it now. And it's only
Right.
the little part that you remember that has a function. What about what came before and
Yeah.
after? So we think that really gets executed then, and that it's probably an evolutionary design that dreams are hard to remember because uh, to the extreme, there's also sleep disorders where people's memories for dreams are exceptionally vivid, so vivid that they can confuse them with reality. And
Hmm.
Hmm.
so we describe a few cases of narcoleptic patients who also can have very vivid memories for their dreams, but then they think that these events that they dreamt really occurred. So some people, after waking up from one of their dreams, will start making funeral arrangements, or calling their vet because their pet is sick, and so on. We described the case of a girl who tells her brother, "Check this out, check what I can do," and she goes up at the top of the flight of the stairs and then takes a few running steps and jumps, right? And of course, she falls, right? And she
Right.
injures herself. And then she tells her brother, "Oh, wait, maybe I didn't do it right." And so what she's trying to do is to fly because she had just had in a narcoleptic phase a dream in which she was able to fly inside her home. But if you are incapable, if these memories are so vivid that they are indistinguishable from wakefulness, it gets really hard. And if you think about in animals, it's a whole other question whether animals dream and what their dreams, if they do dream, what they are like, how they are experienced, and it touches on to what their waking states are like. But if you're a zebra and you're a zebra, sorry, you're a lion and you just dreamt that you've hunted down a zebra and now you're eating it and you wake up hungry, right? But you just ate a zebra. It's like, this doesn't really make sense.
Yeah, right.
Or you're a rat in a lab and you dream that you're outside somewhere and you wake up in a cage. It's kind of like, all these things would be really confusing. And so it's probably by design that the dreams are hard to remember. And we also have to keep in mind that as human beings, when we learn about dreams as children, most children, there's many studies done of this, children's gradual understanding of what it is, what we mean by dreams. At first, most kids believe that dreams are real. They take place in a real environment. That's why, kids wake up from a nightmare and go see their parents, and they're like, well, there's the proverbial monster, in my closet or under my bed. For them, they're real physical events. And so they don't want to go back to the room. And so it takes a while for us to understand that these are subjective experiences, that no one else can see them, that they're private,
Right.
and that when we awaken, they are gone, or at least we hope so.
Right.
But then, going back to the kid example you just left us with, I mean, it's like you then become so familiar with the concept of dreaming eventually that I think most people just kind of forget how wild and strange and unusual dreaming really is. I mean, I know when I think about dreaming, the more I think about dreaming, the weirder it becomes. And, as it relates to the next up, I think you can extrapolate that to just life because you could be one of those people that is always looking for a singular answer. You can always try to do things linearly, or you can try to do what REM sleep is like, which is look for different associations, look for different connections, and in real life that might help you put a mirror up against you to see where your ignorances lie and also where opportunities for growth lie as well. So it's like, do you want to start to look between verticals for connections, or do you want to continue to just stay in your lane and look for one singular answer?
Absolutely. I think that's a very, very good point. And there's a lot of things we take for granted, and it's certainly true of dreams. Um, and that's one point, one of the many points that we try to bring forth, at least in the book, as well as that for both Bob Stickgold and I, um, even after these multiple decades of studying dreams, we're still in awe of the process. And it's not because someone says, "Oh, we think this is due to serotonin," that it's just a level of description. As I like to say, no one wakes up in the morning and says, "Guess what? Last night, you won't believe this. My prefrontal cortex was deactivated. And then, there was a shot of dopamine and my hippocampus came online." And no, what the reason dreams have the history they do and have generated the interest is the actual experiential side of dreams. And then there's things that still boggle the mind, or at least my mind, sort of the characters we encounter in our dreams.
Mm.
Now, some of them, of course, are sort of two-dimensional and, speak gibberish and so on. But some of them are really quite fascinating and compelling. And they can behave and do things and say things as if they had their own consciousness.
Right.
I've had dream characters say, "Tony, look behind you," and I turn around, there's this creature arriving, but it's only later when I wake up and remember the dream going, "Yeah, that's pretty clever,"
Right,
someone
yeah.
pointing out perceptually,
Yeah,
it's
right.
my brain creating this.
Yeah.
But I guess my brain knows what it's creating behind me. But it's fascinating. And the other thing I like to point out, even, we were briefly touching upon lucid dreaming, and that's a particular area of fascination for me, both as in terms of dream science, but also personally, is that even in a dream in which that you're dreaming, you can make a character appear out of thin air, or expect them to be there. And once they're there, but when you ask them a question, you don't know how they're going to answer, even in a lucid dream.
Right.
So your brain is creating this person. Your brain knows what it's going to answer. He's about to give you an answer, but you don't. And so there's this whole layer of the dream that is always kept away from conscious awareness. And that fascinates me. And to me, that's a really useful and intriguing tool, because I like engaging dream characters in conversations, because they surprise me sometimes in the way they answer questions. In a very real way, I could say I'm surprising myself, because my brain is creating these characters, but yet I have no idea, what they are about to say. And again, they react to you as if they had their own thoughts and feelings. So you might dream of an ex, and then this person comes back, says they want to get back together with you. You say, "No, it's a bad idea," and they get really upset. So it's not just you who's reacting to the situation, but this person in front of you who has feelings for you, evidently, and who is getting upset by your reluctance. I mean, they're acting like a separate entity, a separate being that has their own state of mind. And how the brain goes about to create all of this, we still don't really have any good ideas. But we can, each of us, make the experience of this, every night of our lives.
Yeah, one of the fascinating things, just as you went through that made me think of, was the fact that we're creating environments that we probably would not be able to replicate in our waking life. Like I can barely draw a stick figure, but I have incredibly vivid dreams with, whole landscapes and buildings with really intricate architecture. But if you were to give me a pen and paper, there's no way I would even be able to draw a rough sketch of what I saw. So it's fascinating that your brain in that REM state can create things, be it storylines or music or images or visuals that you wouldn't be able to create in your waking life. It's like there's an intelligence there that you might not even have access to when you're awake.
I absolutely agree. And goes, you mentioned visuals, but it can also be sensations of, for instance, flying through the air. It can be erotic sensations. It can be these various emotions. It can be smells, really good smells or bad smells that can be relatively rare in dreams. But again, in certain cultures, smells are almost as prevalent as visual elements in dreams, at least in Western society. So that can vary. But yeah, your brain, or your dreaming brain, is capable of all this fascinating creativity and all of these neurocognitive skills, that we'd be hard pressed to put into action while we are awake. Absolutely. And before, when you were mentioning that there's a lot of things we take for granted, that maybe we have an awe and wonder as we're kids, and then with respect to dreams, we kind of forget about that. And also, dreams by and large are not really valued by Western society, so we tend to dismiss it. But yeah, there is these wonderful, really mind-boggling processes that immerse us in these virtual worlds. And you only need to think also about, almost everyone's had a bad dream or a nightmare at some point in their lives, and they're quite compelling in terms of how you react, in terms of the storyline, and in how we feel in them. So yes, I think your point about, you can't draw a stick figure, but you can create these entire worlds and buildings, and they're three-dimensional. It's not just you're creating this on a page, you're actually navigating through them.
Yeah, right.
And even if you think about that, it's really complicated, because if you're approaching someone, you meet a friend from high school and they go, "Oh, hi," and you walk towards them. Well, they need to become bigger, right?
Oh, yeah.
Perceptually, you got to make them bigger, and then some of them speak in particular accents, or you met someone, and then you have someone in your dream that's speaking with a French accent or something, and something that probably verbally you could not reproduce what
Right.
you were. Yet you're able to, impart these accents and mannerisms to characters that are quite convincing in dreams. So perceptually, socially, your brain does a lot of wonderful things. And that's why I think that, for the people interested in dream science, we got a long ways to go. And so it's great. I mean, we're not about to have definitive answers. We're just, more pieces that we're solving in the puzzle. But the puzzle is, I think, much more complex than many people believe.
It's like a primitive form of virtual reality. And I think that's what made this book so incredible for me. It was one of those books that changed my life, because reading your book has allowed me to be more empathetic with people. This is something that we can unite on. The fact that there's billions of dreams that are taking place every night. Almost all of us are dreaming. And that, like, we're entering this world of endless, unique possibilities every single night. This is something that can unite us. And the fact that we get dropped into this existence, no one had a choice in this, and we have this waking body, and then every night our brain does what it does without us really knowing it. It's something that can connect us. Like, we should feel for each other just on the fact that we all dream, and that can create a common ground that's happening for all of us.
Wow, that's beautiful. And I'm if the book helped emphasize this feeling or create whatever, I'm more than delighted.
And for people that maybe want to go kind of deeper into their own dreams, maybe they're having trouble remembering their dreams at this point. Is there any way to kind of kickstart that? I've always had a pretty easy time remembering my dreams, but I have people in my own family that say that they don't dream. Of course, I now know they do, but it must mean they don't really remember their dreams at all. So is there a way for people to engage when, either before they go to bed or when they wake up in the morning, engage their mind in a way where they can kind of condition themselves to try to remember more clearly?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And yeah, there's things they can do both before they go to bed and when they wake up. The key is really when they wake up, because you're saying you can remember your dreams quite well, but even when you do remember a dream in the morning, that memory is quite fragile. So already by lunch hour, for instance, unless you've told it to someone or wrote it down, maybe you'll only remember, the core outline of it. And, a day or two later, it might have faded even further. So even memories of dreams, even when we have them, are quite fragile. Now, one key thing is how we wake up in the morning. And so if you wake up with an alarm and, immediately you open your eyes and you close your alarm or your watch or whatever is waking you up and you start thinking about your day, any memory of any dream that you had is probably instantaneously, um, zapped. And so you got to give yourself a chance to remember. So the first thing is, if you wake up with an external source, turn it off, but then, stay quiet in bed with your eyes closed. See if there's any images that come back. You can also, if nothing is there, turn, if you wake up on your back, turn onto your side and, give yourself, 15, 20 seconds on your side and see something. So linger in bed, change a few positions and see if there's something. If you remember something, even if it's a vague image, get into the practice of keeping a dream diary, or you can dictate it into your smartphone or what have you. And so those are important things. And incidentally, many people during the pandemic report, oh, I'm having these crazy dreams, and I'm dreaming a lot more than I did before. Why? And one reason that ties into what I'm just discussing is that many people during the pandemic, since if they were students, maybe their classes were online. If they were workers, they started working from home. But many people were sleeping more than they usually did and rushing less in the morning because you don't have to commute. You don't have to. And so there, as I've mentioned at the outset, REM sleep periods get longer and longer as the night progresses. And so if you're sleeping an extra half hour, 45 minutes in the morning, a good chunk of that, chances are, will be REM sleep. So you've been immersed longer in more intense dreams. And if you wake up and with even a little bit less oomph in terms of, I got to start the day and I got a meeting, blah, blah, and you're a bit more relaxed because you're going to be doing everything from home, you're creating proper conditions to remember your dreams more. And so there's evidence that people aren't necessarily, dreaming more, but they are living in a way that allows them to remember more of their dreams. Then there's other factors, if they're stressed, maybe they have more awakenings, remember more dreams, but by and large, that's true. And some people have the same experience when they go on holidays. They go, oh, when I'm on holidays, I have these long, crazy dreams, that I don't have when I'm home. But the key is, how they are sleeping. So they can do these kinds of things in the morning to try to remember their dreams. You can also use something as simple when you go to bed as auto-suggestion. You tell yourself, I will remember my dreams tomorrow. And this also tends to work for many people. And the key also is to keep at it. It's not because you tried one or two nights that necessarily it'll work and you'll start remembering your dreams. But if you are at it, especially people who rarely remember them, these things can certainly augment. So you start remembering more and more of your dreams. Some people also like to read or to listen to, whatever dreams they recorded the morning of, the night before they go to bed, to sort of re-immerse themselves in the images that they had the night before. But by and large, people who have good dream recall also tend to have a certain interest in their dreams. We also know that there's physiological differences between and morphological differences in the brain of people who are very high dream recallers and people who almost never recall their dreams. So there's variations, and a bit like skills. I mean, there's some people who can pick up the piano really quickly. And others like me who, it's a hopeless task. But even for someone hopeless like me, if I took enough lessons, I could probably learn something rudimentary. And the same thing goes with dream recall or another ability like lucid dreaming.
It's so true. It's because of your book that, I must be doing auto suggestion without necessarily realizing it. But for the past 2 or 3 weeks, I feel like I've been going to bed anticipating that I'm going to remember something from the night, something from my dreams. And I've been waking up with like the lingering, like the last part of that dream. And I've never been much of a dream recaller, but I feel like I'm putting the effort into it. My mind is kind of preparing for it. And I'm starting to be able to practice just a little bit in terms of remembering the dreams, which I think is interesting because you have this camp. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you have people like Francis Crick, who discovered the structure of DNA. And in 1963, he suggested that we actually dream in order to forget, and that the worst thing we could be doing is try to remember our dreams. So you have people on both sides of the spectrum.
Yes, but unfortunately, there's some people on different parts of the spectrum who know very little about dream research, and I
Hmm.
say that quite respectfully. But
Yeah.
one direct um, prediction of Frick's idea that we dream to forget, which is interesting in and of itself, but
Yeah.
is that, well, people who have high dream recall should have poor psychological well-being, and that's not the case. So
Hmm.
you could take just an hour and do a research on what do we know about dream recall and what about the people who remember a lot of their dreams. And if your model is correct, then these people should not be doing well because they're remembering all kinds of material that the brain is trying to forget. And so that should be shot down as a non-starter. Some people have proposed that, oh, we dream so that your eyes can move inside their globes to keep the liquids that are there from congealing overnight, right? Like, really?
Yeah.
Back to the tongue, right?
Right, right,
Tongue
right.
is there to taste. No, it's there to talk. And so, okay, fine. So your eyes move. Don't you think your brain could have come up with an easier way to make your eye moves than to create all these hallucinatory experience? It could have just, your heart beats during the night, your breathing goes, you have muscle twitches. It could have just done,
Yeah,
left,
right.
right a few times in the night. So to have something, again, some things are, I think, overly simplified. And unfortunately, I think some of these ideas come out of a misunderstanding of dreams and also an oversimplification of what dreams are. And so to me, to have an explanation, we dreams that our eyes can move inside their eye sockets. Dreams occur outside of REM sleep. And it does nothing to explain many of these features of dreams and can dream lead us to be creative and why do we have emotions in dreams? I mean, if you're going to just be moving your eyes, why have emotions? If you're going to need to forget your dreams, why have bizarreness? Why have emotional content? Why have social interactions? Why
Mhm.
have witches and goblins chase us as kids? I mean, it really doesn't make much sense. And so um, I have interests in, for example, I love reading about physics, but I'm not going because I have an interest, sort of throw out an explanation of what black holes do for a living.
Mm.
And I feel that, people are really at liberties with dreams, whereas, there's literally thousands upon thousands of studies that have been done on especially the content of dreams in different populations. And at the very least, you should be a little bit familiar with this literature before pronouncing, on maybe why this is going on. But of course, that's my bias.
No, no, it makes sense. It makes sense. Well, we started the conversation talking about your own first lucid dream. I'm curious, returning to the topic of your own work with your dreams, is it something that you still feel you're building skill in, like progressively year over year? I imagine you're still very much engaged in that. Are you a better lucid dreamer today than you were a year ago today? Do you think, Tony?
Um, Okay, well, if I take it over a lifespan, no, I think my abilities peaked maybe 15 years ago,
Mm.
honestly. And I think this just has to do with aging and family responsibilities. And
Mm.
um, now, if you take a smaller time period, and your question is more than a year ago, I would say, oh yeah, but I think that's much of it is due to the pandemic,
Mm.
because I've been able to give myself or allow myself to sleep a bit more because I don't have to rush out, go to work, what have you. Um, and so I think the conditions have been more favorable. Also, the period where I was working on the book, I tried to actually, take like 15, 20 minutes to do these mindfulness meditative exercises before going to sleep. Things that I used to do when I was a graduate student and so on, that like many other people, life gets in the way.
Yeah,
And,
sure.
there's just so much time. And so I got back into that. And so absolutely. I've also made a lot of efforts to try to dream of these very intriguing recurrent dream characters that I've had in the past. And that, unfortunately, I've been unsuccessful with. And part of me is really saddened. They're like old friends that,
Oh yeah.
it's a weird thing to say, but they're people that only exist, as far as I know, in some of my dreams. And I never know when I dream about them, and I try to plot out, when they tend to occur. I don't know. But they've always been like a gift. It's always been really fun reconnecting. And, now it's been, years. And so part of me is like, well, maybe, I've set them free somewhere. I don't know.
Yeah, right.
But the fascination, again, with dream characters, even in non-lucid dreams, that remains. And so I still try to figure out, why people said and did the things they did and said in my dreams, and where maybe my brain came up with that and why. But that's more, of a own internal exercise of trying to make sense of that. But to get back to your question about, am I a better lucid dreamer, whatever, now than I was, I think I'm a wiser one. But in terms of actual ability, like if I played the guitar and you wanted a recording of me, 15 years ago, you go, oh no, Tony, man, you're a much slicker guitarist, 15 years. That'd be my take on my dreaming abilities.
Yeah, that's a fair answer. Well, definitely something that I'm sure our audience out there is interested in, or at least a portion of them are interested in. And I myself, I've been recording my dreams for a year now in pretty high detail. But after reading your book, I feel like maybe trying to learn a little bit of lucid dreaming is the next frontier. I don't know if I'll have a natural knack for it, but might as well experiment. So we'll see.
Well, there's a lot of good techniques that people can try to learn to have lucid dreams, and some of them are detailed in the book. And there's a lot of also gizmos people can purchase. But at least the scientific evidence suggests that some of the best techniques, or the more reliable ones, are things that anyone can practice at home without purchasing anything.
Yeah,
they should purchase your book because of all the profound insights that we found. But also, I mean, when we all start to go out and, once we get vaccinated and start to socialize, I mean, look, dreams and dream research is becoming widely accepted as an object of scientific study. There's a bunch of philosophers and scientists and, neuroscientists that are, thinking about this. It's an all-time high. So this is one of those things where you can bring it into a conversation in real life with other people and be part of that conversation. Talk about what dreams are, talk about where they come from, talk about what they mean, talk about what they're for, like engage in a unique conversation other than, hey, what did you do during quarantine?
Right. That's interesting you mentioned that also, because there is a slow but growing movement along these lines of dream sharing. People getting together, and the reason that they're getting together is to share and explore their dreams. And it's another way of connecting with others that can be really an eye-opening, enjoyable way of doing things, and exploring this other dimension of our existence. So yeah,
absolutely.
I think so too. And hopefully and by the way, that's a tradition in many indigenous people, for instance, where the sharing of dreams and the importance given to dreams plays, a huge role, or has played a huge role, going back in some places, 10,000 years. And so we're maybe only catching up now to what some people have known is important, or an interesting way of connecting with others. And that's been known for, generations.
Absolutely. It's ancient.
Well, there's probably room for both, for tech and phones and music and all these, neuromodulators, whatever, but also something, as basic yet perplexing as sharing our dreams.
Well, we'll leave you with one final question that we've been asking all of our guests the past few weeks. It's a little out of left field, but I'm sure you'll have a great answer for us. What animal would you be for a day if you could be any animal, Tony?
If I could be any animal, I would like to be a hawk. Yeah. Again, I think some of the nicest dreams I've had were flying dreams. I love the bird's eye view, and I'd like to have it with real wings and real claws and beak and the the real eagle eye, and spot the mouse at 400 meters away.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I wouldn't go catch the mouse. Yeah, so I'd say, some kind of raptor.
That's awesome. Yeah. Well, the lucid dreaming is a good alternative in the meantime before perhaps your next life. The book is When Brains Dream, Exploring the Science and Mystery of Sleep. Again, it's a fascinating read, and there's a great deal of research and scholarship in there that we didn't get the chance to cover today. So if you're listening out there and you want to learn more about sleep and dream science, you should pick up a copy and read it in full. Tony, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun. Thanks.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode, you can sign up for the Rising Weekly newsletter sent out each week.
Every Friday, we expand on the episode with insights, recommendations, and more.
You can sign up at risinglatterly.com.
Thank you.